You look up on a clear night, and the sky seems to answer you. It glitters, it shimmers, it folds itself into constellations that feel almost designed for human eyes, as if the cosmos had been arranged like a vast chandelier hanging above a small, breathing world. The stars appear close to one another, gathered in soft clusters, threaded together by faint ribbons of light. The Milky Way drapes itself across the dark like a torn veil of silver dust, and in that moment, standing beneath it, you feel something deeply intuitive, something almost ancient, the sense that the universe is full, and if this quiet contradiction between the sky we think we know and the emptiness that truly surrounds us pulls you deeper, subscribe to Beyond the Universe, because the farther we look into the dark, the more it seems the universe is not revealing how full it is, but how much of itself is missing. It feels full of stars, full of motion, full of distant suns burning patiently in the black, full of galaxies wheeling through space like slow, luminous storms. Every photograph from every observatory seems to confirm it. Wherever a lens turns, light answers. Wherever a telescope listens, signals arrive. The universe, in every direction, appears to be a place crowded with things, a place where presence outweighs absence, where light outnumbers darkness, where the sheer density of stars and galaxies suggests an inheritance of abundance. And if this quiet contradiction between what we see and what is truly out there is the kind of question that pulls at something inside you, then stay here with us on Beyond the Universe, because the places that look the most empty may turn out to be the ones with the most to say about where everything is going. The truth, when you finally approach it, does not arrive as a single fact. It arrives as a slow tilting of perspective. It begins when you realize that the night sky you grew up beneath is not a window into the universe. It is a mask, a flattering portrait, a carefully lit image painted on the inside of a much larger, much emptier room. The stars you see are not your neighbors. They only appear close because light has traveled long enough to gather them onto a single curved canvas above your eyes. Stretch that canvas back to its true scale, and the stars drift apart, slipping into distances that the human mind was never built to hold. Between any two of those familiar points of light lies an ocean of nothing so wide that an entire civilization could rise, flourish, and disappear in the time it would take a single beam of light to cross it. You are not standing beneath a crowded sky. You are standing beneath a thin shimmer of survivors. Out of an unspeakable volume of darkness, only the brightest, closest, most fortunate photons have reached you. The rest of the universe is silent in a way you cannot perceive, because your eyes were never tuned to listen to absence. This is the first contradiction. The universe does not look the way it is. It cannot. The night sky is a beautiful lie told by geometry, a sleight of hand performed by distance and time. The cosmos, examined honestly, is not a glowing room full of stars. It is an immense darkness with a faint scattering of fires, separated by gulfs so wide that the word distance loses its meaning. And once you begin to suspect this, you cannot unsuspect it. You begin to look at the sky differently. You begin to sense the spaces between the stars rather than the stars themselves. You begin to feel that what is between them is not nothing. It is something vast, something that has its own architecture, something that may in fact be the dominant feature of all that exists. Consider the simplest measurement. If you took the sun, with all its heat and weight, and shrank it down to the size of a grain of sand, the nearest star would still be several kilometers away. Place another grain, then another. Walk outward, keep walking. Days would pass, weeks. Whole landscapes of empty pavement would stretch between each tiny speck. That is not a galaxy. That is just the local neighborhood, the small porch outside the front door of our solar system. Now expand that model outward to the size of the Milky Way, and the grains of sand become so sparse that you could wander for a lifetime through the model and never encounter one. The galaxy, which appears in every photograph as a dense river of stars, is in truth a thin haze of pinpoints suspended in an overwhelming volume of vacuum. Stars do not crowd each other. They drift, separated, each one held in solitude by the geometry of empty space. But it goes deeper, because once you accept the emptiness inside a single galaxy, you must turn your attention outward, to the space between galaxies, and there the scale becomes something the mind refuses to accept. Between our galaxy and its nearest large neighbor lies a stretch of vacuum so wide that light, the fastest messenger in the universe, requires more than 2 million years to cross it. 2 million years of unbroken travel through nothing. No friction, no interruption, no detour, just darkness pulling in every direction. And our nearest galactic neighbor is, by cosmic standards, almost on top of us. It is practically in the same room. Beyond it lie galaxies separated by tens of millions of light years. then hundreds of millions, then billions, with the spaces between them growing not just larger, but stranger, until distance itself begins to feel less like a measurement and more like a kind of forgetting. You begin to realize that the universe is not a place where things are arranged. It is a place where things are scattered, thinly, reluctantly, almost as an afterthought against an overwhelming background of vacancy. The stars and galaxies are not the content of the cosmos, they are the punctuation. The cosmos itself is the silence between the marks, and yet this silence is not still. It is not passive. It moves, it expands, it rearranges itself in ways we are only beginning to understand. The emptiness of the universe is not the emptiness of an abandoned house. It is the emptiness of a held breath. Something is happening inside it, something structural, something that shapes everything we see without ever showing its own face. To grasp this, you have to abandon the image you were given as a child. Forget the diagrams with stars sprinkled evenly across black backgrounds. Forget the careful illustrations of orderly solar systems and gentle spirals. The real universe, when you map it at its largest scales, does not look like a sprinkling at all. It looks like a structure, a net, a skeleton, a web stretched across distances that should not be possible for any single object to span. Astronomers, when they began plotting the positions of galaxies in 3 dimensions, expected to find a uniform mist, a smooth scattering, a randomness that would confirm the comforting idea of a homogeneous cosmos. What they found instead was something stranger and more beautiful, and in a quiet way, more unsettling. The galaxies were not random at all. They were arranged. They clung to long threads of luminous matter. They clustered along curved sheets. They gathered at intersections where filaments met like the joints of an unimaginable lattice. And between these threads and sheets, in the spaces where galaxies refused to settle, there were enormous regions of nothing. Not small gaps, not modest absences, voids. Vast hollow chambers of space carved out of the cosmic landscape, each one large enough to swallow thousands of galaxies if it had chosen to hold them, and yet it held almost none. The universe, mapped honestly, looks less like a snowstorm of stars and more like a foam of darkness with light caught on its edges. The bright matter we admire is only the wetness clinging to the surface of vast invisible bubbles. The bubbles themselves are the universe's true volume. Most of what exists by any measure of space is contained inside these silent, hollow regions. You can feel something shift when you understand this. The sky stops being a ceiling and becomes a thin crust. What you thought was the universe was only its glowing skin. Beneath that skin, or rather between its threads, there are rooms of darkness so large that human language begins to stumble around them. A single cosmic void can span hundreds of millions of light years. Some are thought to stretch even further. Inside one of these regions, you could travel in any direction for an unimaginable duration and never pass close to a galaxy. The sky around you, if you were somehow placed at the center of such a void, would not look like our sky at all. It would be almost completely black. A few faint smudges might cling to the far horizons, but the dense, comforting backdrop of stars and distant galaxies that we take for granted would simply not be there. You would float in a darkness so complete that the universe might appear to have ended, and yet you would still be inside it, surrounded by it, embedded in it. The emptiness would not be a place outside the cosmos. It would be the cosmos in its most honest form. This is the revelation that begins to undo the old picture. The universe is not mostly full with occasional empty spaces. It is mostly empty with occasional full spaces. Light is the exception. Darkness is the rule. The structures we celebrate, the galaxies, the clusters, the gleaming nurseries of stars, are rare ornaments draped along the edges of an architecture whose dominant material is absence. And this absence is not blank. That is the part that begins to disturb the mind once it settles in. The voids are not random failures of the universe to fill itself. They are arranged. They have shapes. They have boundaries. They press against the filaments of galaxies with a kind of geometric insistence. Something has carved them. Something has shaped them. Something has decided where matter would gather and where it would not. The strange part is not that the universe is empty. The disturbing part is what that emptiness is doing. The voids are not still. They are expanding, growing, pushing outward against the threads that surround them. Over cosmic time, they have widened. The galaxies along the filaments have been pulled into thinner and thinner formations, while the voids between them have swelled, claiming more and more of the available volume. The universe, in its long unfolding, has been emptying itself out. And here is where wonder begins to tremble. Because if the universe is becoming emptier, If the regions of nothingness are growing while the islands of structure are stretching apart, then the cosmos is not moving toward richness. It is moving toward separation. The architecture you see in the cosmic web is a snapshot of a process, not a destination. The threads are loosening. The bubbles are widening. The light is becoming more scattered against the dark. You begin to feel a quiet pressure behind the sky. Not a malevolent one, not an angry one. Something colder than that. Something patient. A vast, indifferent thinning that has been underway for billions of years and shows no sign of stopping. The cosmos, when seen across its full timeline, looks less like a celebration and more like a slow exhalation. And here is where the second illusion of the night sky begins to crumble. The light you receive from those distant points of brightness is not a live broadcast, it is a recording, a delayed message, a letter sent across so many years that by the time it arrives, the sender may no longer exist in the form that wrote it. When you look at the sun, you do not see it as it is. You see it as it was 8 minutes ago. When you look at the bright star sitting low above your horizon, you may be seeing light that left it before any human civilization had built its first city. When you look at the smudge of a neighboring galaxy, you're receiving photons that began their journey when our earliest ancestors had not yet learned to make fire. And when telescopes peer at the most distant galaxies, they catch light that left when the universe itself was still young, still untangling, still arranging the first generations of stars. The sky is not a window into the present. It is a museum of moments that ended long ago. Each star is a small portrait of a former self. Each galaxy is a frozen postcard from a version of itself that may no longer exist. To look at the universe is to look into a vast, layered past where every direction shows a different epoch, and every glimpse is older than the one above or below it. And this means something quietly devastating. The universe you see is not the universe that is. It is the universe that was. The arrangement of galaxies you observe tonight is, in part, a configuration that no longer holds. The light still reaches you, but the worlds that emitted it have moved on, aged, drifted, perhaps even faded. You are watching a play whose actors have long since left the stage. You are listening to voices whose mouths closed eons ago. And the deeper you look, the less comforting it becomes. Because the further out you stare, the older the message becomes, the more removed from any present you can confirm. There is no direct sight of the universe as it is right now. There can never be. Light, for all its speed, is too slow for the distances involved. The cosmos, in its honest geometry, will only ever speak to you in delays. You begin to understand that astronomy is not the act of seeing the universe. It is the act of reading its old letters. The night sky is a correspondence written across millions and billions of years, and the human eye is just one final reader at the end of a long chain of arrivals. Whatever the universe is doing right now in this exact instant is invisible to you. You will not know about it for ages, and by the time you do, the universe will be doing something else, somewhere else, far beyond your reach. And it gets worse, because the messages themselves are not arriving unchanged. The light that crosses the cosmos is bent, stretched, and reshaped by the very space it travels through. As the universe expands, the wavelengths of distant light are pulled longer, dragged toward the red, faded toward invisibility. The signals grow weaker, dimmer, more transparent with each passing eon. Some of them, the oldest and faintest, have been stretched so far that they no longer register as light at all. They have slipped into the quiet hum of background radiation, dispersed across the sky like the cooling echo of a fire that burned long before any planet existed to feel its warmth. The universe, when you finally let yourself see it this way, becomes a place of fading messages, a place where every signal is an artifact, a place where every photon is an heirloom from a vanished moment. And you, the observer, are simply the last room in a hallway of mirrors, each one reflecting a slightly older version of a cosmos that refuses to be seen as it is. And this leads to something more disturbing. If most of what exists is empty, and most of what you see is old, then your sense of the universe is built almost entirely on memory and absence. The objects feel solid because they are bright. The structures feel intimate because they are familiar. But beneath that brightness, beneath that familiarity is a darker truth. The universe is not what is here. The universe is what is missing, multiplied by what is delayed. You begin to feel very quietly that you are not standing in a crowded cathedral. You are standing in a cathedral whose pillars are mostly distance, whose stained glass is mostly hollow space, whose congregation has long since wandered out into corridors you cannot follow. The light that remains is enough to convince you the cathedral is full. But the building, in its true dimensions, is mostly air, mostly silence, mostly the soft architecture of nothing. And the architecture itself is changing. The pillars are drifting apart, the corridors are growing longer, the voices are taking longer to reach you and arriving fainter when they do. There is no sign that this process will reverse. Every observation, every careful measurement, every long stare into the deepest fields of the sky has only confirmed it more firmly. The universe is not filling up, it is not gathering, it is not consolidating, it is unfolding into something thinner, something larger, something more separated than it has ever been. The contradiction becomes complete. The sky that looks so full is mostly empty. The light that looks so present is mostly past. The structure that looks so permanent is mostly stretching. And the silence between everything, the silence you can almost hear when you stand outside on a cold, clear night, is not the silence of stillness. It is the silence of a universe in motion, moving slowly, inevitably, away from itself. This is where wonder begins to develop a shadow, not because the cosmos has become less beautiful, but because its beauty has become harder to trust. You can still feel the awe, you can still feel the pull, you can still feel that ancient instinct to look upward and find meaning. But now behind it there is a colder current, a whisper that the things you are looking at are not what they appear to be. A suggestion that the place you call the universe is far emptier, far older and far more restless than your senses ever allowed you to suspect. And once you have heard that whisper, the sky never quite settles back into its old shape. You will still see the stars, you will still see the constellations, you will still recognize the slow drift of the Milky Way across the night. But beneath that familiar pattern, you will sense the deeper structure pressing through, the threads, the walls, the clusters, and around them, surrounding them, dominating them, the voids, the patient, expanding immense rooms of nothing that hold everything else inside them like fragile lights inside a darkened palace. You begin to suspect, in a way that is not quite fear and not quite reverence, that the universe is not a place of fullness occasionally interrupted by emptiness. It is a place of emptiness occasionally interrupted by light, and that the light, for all its brilliance, is not the main story. It is the small, bright margin around a much larger silence. The closer you look, the more that silence reveals itself, to have shape, not the shape of stars, not the shape of galaxies, something else, something deeper, something that does not glow, does not speak, does not announce itself, but quietly holds the entire visible cosmos in a structure none of us can yet fully see. And it is into that shape, into that architecture of absence, into that geometry of the voids, that the next part of the story must move. To map the voids, you have to abandon the human habit of measuring the universe by what shines. Light has always been our compass. We learned the sky by reading its fires, by tracing the brightest points and connecting them into shapes our minds could hold. But the voids do not shine. They do not burn. They do not send signals. They are mapped only by the slow absence of everything else, by the negative imprint left when galaxies refuse to appear in regions where, by every reasonable expectation, they should. Imagine standing in a darkened hall and being told that the walls of the room can only be sensed by the way other people move around them, by the way footsteps avoid certain regions of the floor, by the way voices never come from certain directions. You would not see the walls. You would deduce them. You would assemble their shape from the patterned silence around them. That is how the voids are known, not by what they contain, but by what bends away from them, not by light, but by the careful arrangement of light's reluctance. And when astronomers finally completed the first true maps of how galaxies were distributed across hundreds of millions of light years, the patterns that emerged were not random and not gentle. They looked almost biological. Long filaments of galaxies threaded through space like the strands of some immense fragile tissue. Sheets of galaxies stretched between the filaments like translucent membranes. Where the filaments crossed, dense knots formed, gathering thousands of galaxies into enormous clusters that pulsed with gravity and motion. And between all of these glowing structures lay the voids, dark and immense, occupying most of the available volume. This is what astronomers came to call the cosmic web. It is one of the most beautiful images ever assembled in the history of human inquiry, and one of the most quietly disturbing. From a distance, it looks luminous, almost alive, a glowing network suspended in 3 dimensions, branching and curving like the neurons of some unimaginable mind. But the closer you look, the clearer it becomes that the web is mostly hollow. Most of its volume is the space inside its cells, not the matter on its threads. The web does not fill the universe. It hangs in it, stretched thin, sparse, a delicate scaffolding draped across a much larger emptiness. And here, the perspective shifts again. Because if you ask what the cosmic web is made of, the answer is not what most people expect. It is not made primarily of stars. It is not made primarily of galaxies. It is not even made primarily of the gas and dust between them. The luminous matter that traces the web, all the glowing material that telescopes have spent centuries cataloging, accounts for only a small fraction of what holds the structure together. The rest, the dominant part, the gravitational backbone of the entire cosmic architecture, is something we cannot see. We call it dark matter, but the name is more of a placeholder than a description. It is not dark in the way a shadow is dark. It is not even matter in any sense we can hold in our hands. It is something invisible, something silent, something that does not interact with light at all. It does not glow, it does not absorb, it does not reflect. It passes through ordinary matter the way ordinary matter passes through empty air, and yet by every measurement we can take it appears to be there. Massive, pervasive, everywhere we are not looking, and even in the places where we are. You feel the presence of dark matter not by seeing it, but by watching what light cannot explain. Galaxies spin faster than their visible mass should allow. Clusters bind themselves together with a grip stronger than the sum of their stars. Beams of light from distant galaxies curve around regions of apparently empty space, bending as if some unseen weight were pressing against the geometry of the universe. Everywhere astronomers look, the visible cosmos behaves as if it were embedded in a larger, heavier, invisible cosmos that quietly shapes it from beneath. The cosmic web, when modeled with this hidden mass included, suddenly makes sense. The filaments trace not just gas and galaxies, but rivers of invisible substance flowing through space. The clusters sit at the intersections of unseen currents. The voids carve themselves out where the dark matter is thinnest, leaving the visible galaxies clinging to the edges of regions where the hidden architecture refused to gather. The bright universe, in this view, is only a surface, a glittering film of foam on the back of a deeper ocean we cannot directly perceive. And this is where the unease deepens, because if most of the gravitational structure of the universe is invisible, then most of the universe, in its truest physical sense, is hidden from us. The galaxies we admire are not the main characters. They are the visible debris drifting on the surface of something larger. The cosmic web we celebrate is only the illuminated trace of a wider, silent framework that does not announce itself in any spectrum we can read. You begin to sense, very quietly, that the universe has been keeping most of itself out of sight, not maliciously, not deliberately, simply by being constructed in such a way that the dominant material of reality does not interact with the senses or with any instrument we have yet built that depends on light. We move through this invisible substance every day. It passes through our planet, through our bodies, through the air we breathe, leaving no trace, no warmth, no whisper. And yet, on the scale of galaxies, it shapes everything. The night sky once again transforms. Where you used to see stars on a black background, you now sense a faint suggestion of something denser pressing against the dark. The black is not just absence anymore. It is hidden weight, hidden architecture, hidden mass moving with its own slow gravitational logic, sculpting the visible cosmos into the threads and walls and voids we are only just beginning to chart. But it gets worse. Because dark matter, mysterious as it is at least a stabilizing presence. It holds galaxies together. It binds clusters. It built the cosmic web in the first place by gathering and concentrating in the early universe, allowing ordinary matter to fall into its wells and ignite the first stars. Dark matter, for all its invisibility, is on the side of structure. It is part of the reason there is anything here at all. The other half of the hidden universe is not like that. The other half does not gather. It does not bind. It does not hold things together. It pushes. It stretches. It works against the cosmic web rather than for it, and it appears to be winning. We call it dark energy, and the name is even more uncertain than the one before it. We do not know what it is. We do not know where it comes from. We do not know if it is a property of space itself, an unknown field, or something deeper still in the underlying fabric of reality. We only know what it does, and what it does is unmake the cosmos at the largest scales. To understand dark energy, you have to first abandon the way most people picture cosmic expansion. The universe is not expanding the way a cloud of debris expands after an explosion. The galaxies are not flying outward through some pre-existing void. There is no central point from which everything is rushing. The expansion is not motion through space. It is motion of space. The fabric itself is stretching. The distance between distant things is increasing not because they are traveling, but because the very ground between them is lengthening beneath their feet. Picture for a moment two small marks drawn on the surface of a balloon. As the balloon inflates, neither mark moves relative to the rubber beneath it. Neither one is traveling, and yet the distance between them grows. They drift apart, not because they are running, but because the surface they sit on is expanding. Now imagine that this is happening in 3 dimensions throughout all of space, in every direction, everywhere at once. That is the expansion of the universe. It is not an event happening somewhere. It is a condition of everything. For most of the last century, astronomers assumed that this expansion was slowing down. It seemed like the only reasonable possibility. Gravity, after all, pulls things together. The combined gravity of all the matter in the universe should be acting like a brake, gently easing the expansion toward some eventual halt, perhaps even reversing it in some far future contraction. That was the expectation. That was the picture most cosmologists carried in their minds for decades. And then near the end of the 20th century, careful measurements of distant supernovae began to disagree. The further astronomers looked, the more the expansion refused to behave as expected. Instead of slowing down, it was speeding up, not just continuing, accelerating, as if something were pressing outward against gravity itself, overpowering it, stretching space faster and faster with each passing eon. This was not a small adjustment to existing theory. It was a quiet rupture in the way we understood the cosmos. Something, somewhere, was driving the universe apart. Something was hidden inside the very vacuum of space, exerting a kind of pressure that grew stronger as the volume of space grew larger. The more universe there was, the more of this strange influence there became. And the more there became, the faster the universe expanded. A feedback, a self-accelerating unraveling, a force that gains power by the very emptiness it creates. You begin to feel the disturbance of this discovery only when you sit with it for a while. Dark energy is not exotic in the way a distant supernova is exotic. It is not far away. It is here, in this room, in the space between your hands, in the gaps between atoms. The vacuum itself, the thing we used to consider the simplest possible state of reality, turns out to carry within it some quiet outward tendency. Wherever there is space, there is this push. Wherever there is more space, there is more push. And as the universe expands, the regions where dark energy reigns grow ever larger, while the regions where gravity can hold its own remain stubbornly the same. This is the second disturbing truth. The architecture of the cosmos is not stable. It is divided into 2 competing tendencies, and they are not evenly matched in the long run. Gravity, the great gatherer, has finite reach. It can only pull on what is close enough to feel it. Dark energy, the great separator, acts everywhere there is space, and there is always more space. Over time, the balance tilts. The gatherer loses ground. The separator gains it. The cosmic web, which once consolidated, begins to thin, and this leads to something more disturbing. Because if dark energy continues to do what it appears to be doing, the future of the universe will not look like the present. It will not be a richer, denser, more interconnected place. It will be the opposite. The filaments will stretch until they snap. The clusters will be torn from one another. The galaxies, still held together by their own internal gravity for a long while, will find themselves marooned in expanding oceans of vacuum, drifting further and further from anything that used to be their neighbor. The cosmic web, in this long unfolding, is not a permanent structure. It is a phase, a temporary arrangement, a passing pattern in the life of a universe that began dense and is becoming sparse. We happen to live during a period when the threads are still bright, when the clusters still hold, when the galaxies are still close enough to see each other. But this period is not the destination. It is a moment in the middle of a much longer fading, and here is where the philosophical pressure begins to build, quietly but firmly. Because if the cosmic web is temporary, then the very view we have of the universe is temporary. The night sky as we know it is a snapshot of a particular epoch, a particular density, a particular brightness. There were times when this sky did not yet exist, when the universe was too young and too dense and too hot to produce the kind of organized structure we see now. And there will be times when this sky no longer exists either, when the universe is too stretched and too thin and too cold to maintain the patterns we currently take for granted. You are not looking at the universe. You are looking at one of its moods, a long, slow, gently fading mood that will not last forever, and which leaves behind no guarantee that any future observer will be able to read it. Already the consequences are beginning to take shape in the way we understand the limits of observation. The universe has an edge for us, not in space, but in visibility. There is a boundary, sometimes called the cosmic horizon, beyond which light has not yet had time to reach us since the beginning of everything. Anything past that boundary is invisible, not because it does not exist, but because the universe is not old enough for its light to have crossed the distance. For a long time, we imagined that this horizon would simply grow with time. As the universe aged, more and more distant regions would come into view. The longer we waited, the more we would see. The cosmos, in this picture, was a slowly opening book, revealing more of itself with every chapter we lived through. But dark energy changes that picture, and it does so in a way that is quietly devastating. Because the expansion of space is accelerating, there are regions of the universe whose distance from us is growing faster than the speed at which their light could ever travel toward us. The space between us and them is stretching faster than light can cross it. Their photons set out in our direction are perpetually pushed back by the lengthening of the road. They will never arrive, not in 1,000,000 years, not in 1,000,000,000, not ever. There is, in other words, a second horizon, a future horizon, a line drawn through the cosmos beyond which any galaxy that lies will become permanently unreachable. Its light, emitted now, will never touch our instruments, no matter how patient we are, no matter how powerful our telescopes become. The universe has placed parts of itself behind a wall that is not made of matter, but of accelerating space, and that wall is closing. You feel the weight of this slowly, because it means that what we can see, even in principle, is not all there is. The observable universe, the only universe we will ever have access to, is a kind of bubble of visibility floating in a much larger reality, whose deeper extent will always be hidden from us. And the bubble is not stable. It is not even growing as steadily as it once seemed. In the long run, it will shrink in a different sense, not in spatial size, but in content. The number of galaxies inside it will fall. The number of distant lights still capable of reaching us will dwindle. The window will narrow even as the universe itself grows larger, and the deeper you look, the less comforting it becomes. Because the cosmos we are studying, the rich and varied cosmos of clusters and filaments and faint distant smudges of ancient galaxies, is in some sense a gift of timing. We exist at a moment when the universe still remembers itself. The cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow of the first hot epoch, still drifts gently through every direction of the sky, reachable by any sufficiently sensitive instrument. Distant galaxies still send us news from when the cosmos was young. The cosmic web is still close enough to be mapped, but all of these gifts have expiration dates. The microwave background, stretched by the expansion of space, will continue to dim, its wavelengths growing longer and longer until eventually it becomes undetectable to any instrument operating within the laws of physics as we know them. The light from the most distant galaxies, already redshifted into faint infrared whispers, will continue to fade, slipping below the threshold of detection. The structures we now use to chart the cosmic web will, one by one, retreat across the future horizon, dropping out of view as space pushes them away faster than their light can resist. There will come a time, in the deep future, when an observer looking up at the sky will not see what we see. They will not see distant galaxies arrayed in patterns. They will not detect the soft background hum of the early universe. They will not be able to map the cosmic web, because the threads will have stretched beyond reach. The signs that once told the universe's history will have been dragged into invisibility by the very expansion that defines that history. The strange part is not that the universe is empty. The disturbing part is what that emptiness is doing to the universe's memory. The cosmos is, in a quiet and impersonal way, erasing the evidence of its own past, not by destroying it, by moving it out of reach, by placing it so far away, so faintly, so deep behind the horizon, that any future intelligence will have no way of knowing it was ever there. This is a kind of cosmic amnesia, not a forgetting in the human sense, but a structural loss of access. The universe is not deleting its history, it is exiling it, pushing it into regions of space-time where no observer can ever follow. And the longer this process continues, the less of the cosmic story will remain visible from any single vantage point. You begin to feel the strangeness of your own position. You are alive with eyes, with instruments, with curiosity, during a window in cosmic history when the universe is still legible, when its structures are still visible, when its past is still reachable through the patient gathering of ancient light. This is not a permanent condition. This is a temporary clarity, a brief season of cosmic openness during which it is possible, just barely, to read the shape of everything before that shape begins to disappear. And it gets worse, because the same expansion that is hiding distant galaxies is also slowly tearing at the connections between the parts of the universe we can still see. Locally, gravity wins for now. Our galaxy holds itself together. Our local group of galaxies, bound by mutual gravity, drifts together as a small, cohesive island in the cosmic ocean. But the larger structures, the superclusters and the great walls of galaxies that lie beyond our gravitational neighborhood, are already losing their grip. They are being pulled apart by the lengthening of the space between them. They will not survive as recognizable groupings into the deep future. They are dissolving, slowly, in the silent acid of expansion. Eventually, our local group itself will be all that remains within reach. Beyond it, in every direction, the visible universe will recede. The other galaxies that today still shimmer faintly in long-exposure photographs will fade, redden, dim, and finally cross the horizon into permanent invisibility. The sky, for any observer in our small bound region, will become provincial, a handful of nearby galaxies, slowly merging with our own, suspended in an apparent emptiness that will look total. To that future observer, the universe will appear to be a single small island of stars surrounded by an infinite black ocean. They will see no other galaxies. They will see no cosmic web. They will see no traces of the early universe in any direction. They will have no reason, from observation alone, to suspect that anything else ever existed. The cosmos, to their senses, will be a small lit room in an endless dark hallway, whose other rooms have all been sealed away. And the most unsettling part is that, from inside that future sky, the truth would be almost impossible to recover. Without the distant galaxies, without the microwave background, without the visible cosmic web, the case for an expanding, evolving universe with a vast history of structure and motion would be enormously difficult to make. A civilization arising in that epoch might develop science, might develop instruments, might develop curiosity as deep as ours, and still arrive at a fundamentally incomplete picture of what reality is. Not because they were less intelligent, because they were born too late. You feel for a moment the strange privilege and the strange burden of your own time. You exist during a period when the universe is still willing to tell its story, when the light is still arriving, when the threads are still visible, when the voids can still be mapped, the dark matter still inferred, the dark energy still detected through the careful comparison of distant brightnesses. This is not a permanent condition. It is a temporary alignment between the age of the universe and the limits of perception. And this is where the existential weight of cosmic emptiness begins to settle in, because the emptiness is not just a feature of the universe. It is the direction the universe is moving, toward more emptiness, toward more distance, toward more isolation. The voids are not anomalies. They are previews. The future of the cosmos looks more like the inside of a void than like the inside of a cluster. The cosmic web is the exception. The voids are the rule. And the universe, slowly, patiently, irreversibly, is becoming more like itself. You are not standing at the edge of emptiness. You are inside a structure that is being absorbed into emptiness. The bright woven cosmos of galaxies and clusters and filaments is being pulled, thread by thread, into the widening dark. The light is not multiplying. It is dispersing. The connections are not strengthening, they are loosening. And the silence between everything is not just preserved, it is growing. And yet, even at this stage, the universe still appears generous. The sky still glitters. The galaxies still hold their shapes. The cosmic web still glows along its threads when imaged in the right wavelengths. Nothing about your night sky looks like a place in decline. The decline is too slow, too vast, too patient to be visible in a single human lifetime, or even in the lifetimes of 1,000 civilizations stacked end to end. The unraveling is real. It is just measured in eons. But knowing this changes the way you see the sky. The brightness no longer feels like proof of permanence. It feels like proof of a moment. The cosmos is not boasting of its abundance. It is exhibiting, briefly, the residue of an earlier, denser version of itself. Before the long thinning takes hold in full, the light above you is not a guarantee. It is a courtesy, extended for a little while longer, by an expansion that has not yet pulled it out of reach. And underneath that thought, beneath the philosophical chill of it, there is one further question that begins to press. If the universe is moving toward greater isolation, toward greater silence, toward more void and less structure, then what becomes of everything that exists inside it? What becomes of the stars, the galaxies, the matter, the energy, the very capacity of the cosmos to do anything at all? Because expansion is only one of the forces shaping the long story. There is another, quieter, more patient process at work in every star, every furnace, every spark of motion in the universe. And that process, even more than expansion, is the one that decides how the story ends. To understand that process, you have to step back from the grand cosmic web and bring your attention closer to something almost intimate: a single star, a single flame, a single moment of heat in the vast cold of space. Because every star is a kind of bargain, a temporary truce between gravity, which wants to crush, and pressure, which wants to push outward. The bargain holds for as long as the star has fuel to burn. Once the fuel runs low, the bargain begins to unravel, and the star, in one way or another, fades. Multiply that single star by the uncountable number of stars in a single galaxy. Multiply that galaxy by the uncountable number of galaxies in the observable universe. And you begin to understand that the universe is not a permanent fire. It is an enormous collection of fires, each one with its own quiet expiration. Some burn fast and bright and die young in violent collapses. Others burn slow and patient and long, lasting hundreds of billions or even trillions of years before they finally exhaust themselves. But all of them, without exception, are burning toward an end. This is the quiet truth that sits beneath every photograph of a glowing nebula, every image of a spiral galaxy, every glittering view of a star cluster. The brightness is not a state of the universe. It is a process, a consumption, a long, patient release of energy that was set into motion long ago and is now slowly being spent. And once it has been spent, it cannot be regathered, not by any mechanism we know. The energy that has been released cannot be put back into the form that released it. This direction, this one-way flow from organized energy toward dispersed energy, is what we mean when we speak of entropy. The word has been used in many ways, sometimes carelessly, but at its core it points to a simple and merciless observation. The universe on the whole tends to move from states of difference toward states of sameness. Hot things share their heat with cold things. Concentrated energy spreads into surrounding emptiness. Order, painstakingly assembled, dissolves into a smoother, blander background. And the reverse, while not strictly impossible in isolated micro-events, is so vanishingly unlikely at large scales that it can be ignored across the lifetime of the cosmos. You can feel entropy in small ways every day, even if you do not name it. A cup of hot tea on a winter morning cools slowly until it matches the room. The room itself loses heat to the world outside. A fire in a hearth burns down until only ash remains, and the ash never reassembles into wood. A footprint in soft sand is smoothed out by the wind. A note struck on a string fades into silence. Nothing reverses on its own. Nothing returns to its earlier sharpness without enormous effort drawn from somewhere else, and the somewhere else in turn pays its own price. Now lift this principle to the scale of the universe. The stars are the cosmic equivalent of those fires in the hearth. They are concentrated pockets of usable difference, born from the collapse of cold gas under gravity, ignited by the immense pressures in their cores, sustained by the steady fusion of light elements into heavier ones. Every photon they release into the cold of space is a small portion of that difference being spent. Every ray of starlight crossing the void is, in effect, a payment in the universe's slow ledger of dissipation, and that ledger only flows one way. The cosmos is, in its long term, a place where structure is being purchased at the cost of overall smoothness. The galaxies you see are not free gifts. They are loans against a much larger pool of organized energy that was concentrated in the early universe and has been spreading outward ever since. Every star formed, every cluster lit, every burst of radiation sent across the dark is a withdrawal from that pool. And the pool, vast as it is not infinite, but it gets worse. Because as the universe ages, the rate at which new stars form is slowing. The cold gas that feeds stellar nurseries is being used up, locked away in long-lived dim stars, in stellar remnants, in dust, in the diffuse halos around galaxies. Some of it is being heated by past generations of stars to the point where it no longer collapses easily into new ones. Some of it is being carried away from galactic centers by ancient outflows and explosions, leaving behind regions less able to ignite new fires. The peak of cosmic star formation lies, by current evidence, far behind us. There was an era long ago when galaxies were brighter, denser, more violently creative, when new stars were born at rates that would dwarf anything happening in the universe today. We did not live in that era. We arrived afterward, in a quieter time, when the great explosion of stellar birth has been winding down for billions of years. The universe is, in this sense, past its loudest moment. The lights are still burning, but fewer of them are being lit each year. You begin to see the long curve of the cosmic story bending downward, not crashing, not breaking, simply bending. The brightness is fading at a pace too slow to notice from any single vantage point, but undeniable when traced across cosmic timescales. The universe of the distant future will not look like a more developed version of today's universe. It will look like a dimmer one, a quieter one, a universe whose largest structures are still present but whose interiors are full of older, cooler, slower lights. And then, as the long story continues, even those lights begin to change. The most massive stars, the ones that burn most ferociously, are also the ones that die fastest. Their lifespans are measured in millions of years rather than billions. They are already, in cosmic terms, a thinning population. The medium-sized stars, like our own sun, last for billions of years before swelling into red giants, shedding their outer layers and collapsing into small, dense remnants. They are the working class of the cosmos, steady and patient, but they too have a clear end written into the equations of their cores. The longest-lived stars, the small, cool red dwarfs, can persist for hundreds of billions of years, perhaps even trillions. They burn so slowly that the entire current age of the universe is only a small fraction of their projected lifetimes. In the far future, when the brighter stars have long since vanished, these dim red embers will still be glowing, sprinkled thinly through aging galaxies, providing a soft, faded light to whatever observers might still exist. But even they will not last forever. They too will eventually exhaust their fuel and contract into small, dense corpses. And once you trace the lifetimes of stars to their conclusions, you arrive at the long inventory of what remains. White dwarfs, the hot, dense cores of stars that once shone brightly, slowly cooling over unimaginable timescales toward a final, dark state. Neutron stars, even denser, the collapsed remnants of more massive explosions, lingering as quiet points of extreme mass. Black holes, the most extreme survivors, swallowing what falls near them, persisting through eons that dwarf the lifetimes of stars themselves. These are the inheritors of the cosmic future, not glowing nurseries, not vibrant spirals, just cooling corpses and quiet wells of gravity in a steadily darkening sky. And this leads to something more disturbing, because the universe of remnants is not just dimmer, it is structurally different. The energy that once flowed freely between stars and galaxies, the patterns of brightness and shadow that define the cosmic web, are reduced to faint embers. The contrasts that gave the cosmos its visual richness are smoothed away. The difference between regions becomes harder to detect. The universe loses, slowly, its ability to create the kind of organized brightness that allowed structures, planets, and observers to exist in the first place. Entropy on this scale is not a cliched story of everything dying. It is something subtler and stranger. It is the gradual disappearance of usable difference. The universe is not collapsing. It is not exploding. It is averaging. It is smoothing. It is pulling itself toward a state in which there is still energy, but no concentration of energy, still matter, but no organized structure of matter, still time, but no events worth marking. To picture it, imagine an enormous landscape covered in hills and valleys. The hills are full of water. The valleys are dry. Streams flow naturally from the hills to the valleys, and as long as there is height difference, the water moves, and the motion can be used to turn wheels, grow crops, power lives. Now imagine that over time the hills gradually wear down and the valleys gradually fill in. The water still exists. None of it disappears, but it stops moving. The land becomes flat. The streams stop running. The wheels stop turning. Not because the water is gone, but because the difference has gone. The universe in its deep future is doing something analogous. The hills of organized energy are wearing down. The valleys of cold emptiness are filling slightly with the dispersed warmth of past fires. The flows are growing weaker. The differences are flattening. There is no sudden collapse. There is only a long, patient leveling until the cosmos becomes a vast, smooth plain in which nothing flows because nothing is higher or lower than anything else. And it gets worse, because the expansion of space, driven by dark energy, accelerates this leveling. As the universe stretches, the radiation pouring through it grows fainter and cooler. The cosmic microwave background, already a chilly relic of the early universe, becomes colder still, its temperature creeping ever closer to absolute zero. The starlight that escaped from past galaxies is spread thinner and thinner across the expanding volume. Even the heat of dead remnants leaks slowly into the surrounding vacuum, never to be recaptured. You begin to feel the convergence of two great processes: the unraveling of structure on the largest scales by expansion, and the dissipation of energy on the smallest scales by entropy. They are not separate. They are different faces of a single long unfolding. The cosmos is stretching itself thin while simultaneously cooling itself smooth. One process pulls things apart. The other dulls them down. Together, they describe a universe moving toward a state we might call silence. Silence here does not mean the absence of motion. It means the absence of meaningful contrast. A universe in which there is no longer any flow strong enough to do work. A universe in which no observer could find a difference large enough to extract from. A universe in which the very concept of an event becomes blurred, because nothing happens with enough distinction to be remembered. And the disturbing part is what that emptiness is doing to the very idea of time. Because time, in a deep physical sense, is bound up with change, with difference, with one moment being distinguishable from another. In a universe of perpetual sameness, where every region looks like every other region, where nothing flows because nothing is concentrated, time itself becomes a strange, almost ornamental concept. The clock still ticks in principle, but there is nothing for the clock to mark. No events, no transformations, no structures rising or falling. Only an endless, undifferentiated stretch of cooled space and faintly drifting remnants. You imagine yourself for a moment, suspended in such a future. Not in this body, of course. No body could survive there, but as a kind of imaginary witness. Around you, the sky is almost completely dark. The galaxies, if any of them are still close enough to see, have faded to a dim red glow as their last small stars burn out. There is no microwave background bright enough to detect. There is no warm radiation from any past fire that has not been thinned beyond recognition by the lengthening of space. The voids that once made up most of the universe's volume now describe its entirety. The cosmic web has dissolved into a faint memory in the equations, with no observable trace remaining. And in this future, you would not be able to know, from observation alone, that any other state of the universe had ever existed. You would have no reason to suspect that there had ever been bright galaxies, that filaments had ever stretched across vast volumes, that clusters had ever knotted themselves into bright cities of stars. You would see only the smooth, dim, exhausted plain of a cosmos that has spent itself. This is the deepest layer of cosmic amnesia, not just the disappearance of distant evidence, but the erasure of meaningful contrast altogether. The universe does not just hide its history, it eventually dissolves the difference between any moment of that history and any other. There is no longer a then and now to distinguish, only an enduring, featureless after, and the deeper you look, the less comforting it becomes, because this is not a process that requires any extraordinary event to unfold. It does not need a final catastrophe. It does not need a collision, a collapse, a rupture, or a sudden death. It only needs time. And the universe, whatever else it lacks, has time in abundance. Time is, in fact, the one thing the cosmos seems willing to spend freely. It is the currency in which the long ending is being paid. You begin to understand that what we call the fate of the universe is not a single dramatic moment, but a vast, slow gradient. There are many proposed names for it, many sketches of its final stages. Some imagine a heat death, in which the universe smoothly thermalizes into a uniform low temperature and nothing further happens. Some imagine a long, dark era ruled by isolated black holes that slowly evaporate over timescales, so immense that no human number can hold them. Some imagine more exotic possibilities, including the tearing of even bound structures by an ever stronger dark energy. The details remain uncertain. The general direction does not. The cosmos is heading from brightness to dimness, from connection to isolation, from structure to silence. And you, the observer, the curious mind reading the messages of the night sky, exist in the rare window where these endings can still be glimpsed. The universe has been given time enough to age, but not so much that it has lost itself. The lights are still burning. The galaxies are still in formation. The cosmic web is still legible. The dark, the cold, the vast empty future still lies ahead, not behind. You stand near the middle of the story, with the rising chapters behind you and the long fading chapters ahead. There is something almost overwhelming about this position, not because it grants any special honor, but because it makes the awareness inescapable. To understand the cosmos at all is to understand that its current state is temporary. To celebrate its beauty is to acknowledge that the beauty will not last. To map its structures is to mark, in advance, the things that will eventually be lost. The science of the universe, pursued seriously, is inseparable from the slow recognition of its mortality. And it goes deeper, because as the awareness of cosmic entropy settles in, it begins to reshape the way you think about every small bright thing in your own life. Every fire, every voice, every gathering of people in a lit room on a cold night. Each of these is a tiny local resistance against the larger drift. A small pocket where energy is concentrated enough to allow conversation, movement, presence. None of these pockets are exempt from the larger flow. Each of them is, in its own way, a small star, burning briefly against an immense cold backdrop. The universe does not single out human beings as the target of its long fading. It does not single out anything. That is the part that becomes hardest to absorb. There is no malice in the slow leveling of the cosmos. There is no will. There is no plan to remove anything that exists. The universe is not deciding to dim. It is simply unable to do otherwise. The same laws that allow stars to ignite, that allow galaxies to form, that allow the chemistry of life to begin in some small pocket of a small planet, are the same laws that demand a long, patient settling towards sameness. Birth and death in this picture are not separate forces. They are two phases of a single direction, and the more carefully you trace it, the more clearly you see that the bright moments of the cosmos are not exceptions to its rules. They are the rules briefly indulging themselves. The galaxies, the planets, the brief warm seasons on rocky worlds where complex molecules can dance, all of these are temporary indulgences of an underlying tendency that, in the long run, prefers silence to song. This is not a comforting thought. It is not meant to be, but it is also not, properly understood, a cruel one. Cruelty would require intention. The universe shows no intention. It simply unfolds. The unfolding happens to include moments of structure, light and life, and it happens to include far longer stretches without any of these. There is no judgment in this. There is only the patient, inhuman arithmetic of physical law. And yet, knowing this, you feel something shift inside the way you look at the sky. The stars no longer feel like decorations. They feel like candles in a vast church with no congregation. The galaxies no longer feel like neighbors. They feel like distant beacons set out by no one, lit for no purpose, burning because the physics of their interiors leaves them no other choice, and dimming in their turn for the same reason. The cosmic web, glimpsed in long exposure images, no longer feels like a network. It feels like a fading nervous system in a body that is losing the ability to feel itself. You imagine the long sequence of futures still to come, the slow exhaustion of star formation in the next tens of billions of years, the gradual reddening of the night sky as old stars dominate, the disappearance of distant galaxies behind the future horizon as expansion accelerates, the settling of remaining matter into long-lived dim remnants. The slow dispersal of remnants by gravitational encounters over time spans that defy any human scale. The slow evaporation of black holes. The cooling of background radiation toward temperatures approaching absolute zero. The final smoothing of contrast into a state of cosmic monotony. And in each of these stages, you can sense the same direction, repeating itself at different scales. The same fading, the same separation, the same loss of difference. The cosmos repeats its message at every level. Structure is temporary, brightness is borrowed, contrast is fleeting, and the long answer is silence. But here, at this moment in the story, the silence has not yet arrived. The light is still in motion. The galaxies are still close enough to be mapped. The voids are still bordered by glowing threads. The cosmic web still pulses with the activity of stars being born and stars being lost, with the slow gravitational dance of clusters, with the faint hum of the early universe still reaching us from every direction. The fading is real. But the fading is not finished. We exist in the long middle, where the beauty is still visible and the loss is still mostly theoretical. And this is where the existential pressure of the story becomes hard to deflect, because to understand all of this is to accept that we are part of a temporary moment of legibility in a much longer history that will not always permit such legibility. We are not the audience for an eternal show. We are the witnesses to a fading one. The cosmos that allowed us to arise with its rich web of structure and energy is in the process of dismantling itself, slowly, patiently, without urgency, but unmistakably. The more you absorb this, the more you sense that the universe is not building towards something, it is unwinding from something. The richness was greatest in the early epochs, when structures first formed and stars first ignited. Since then, every chapter has been a step further along a path of diffusion. We arrived late enough to see the structures fully grown, but early enough to still see them. That alignment of timing is not a guarantee. It is not a promise. It is a fragile and finite window that we did not choose and cannot extend. And you begin to wonder what it means to be aware inside such a window, to have eyes that can see the cosmic web, to have minds that can map the voids, to have instruments that can detect the cooling whisper of the first hot moments. None of this would matter in any cosmic accounting if there were no observers to receive it. The universe does not need to be seen. It does not need to be understood. It does its slow unfolding, whether or not anything notices. And yet, here, for a brief stretch of cosmic time, there is noticing, there is awareness. There is the strange, almost unlikely fact of intelligence arising in a corner of a thinning cosmos, just in time to glimpse the shape of its own surroundings, before the shape begins to fade. That noticing is not an answer to the silence. It is not a counterforce, it is not a stand against entropy in any meaningful physical sense. It is simply a kind of brief inner light, lit within a creature standing on a small world inside a small galaxy, inside a thinning web of galaxies, inside an expanding, cooling, dimming universe. The light of awareness is real. It is also small, and it is also subject to the same long story as everything else. You feel then the slow accumulation of weight that this entire picture places on the simple act of looking up at the sky. The sky is no longer just beautiful. The sky is no longer just mysterious. The sky becomes a kind of message, written in old light, addressed to anyone willing to read it carefully. The message says that the universe is vast, mostly empty, mostly stretching, mostly forgetting itself. The message says that the structures we admire are temporary. The message says that the silence we sense between the stars is not just the gap between voices, but the eventual destination of all voices. And yet the message does not arrive with anger. It does not threaten. It does not demand anything from you. It simply exists, drifting down through the atmosphere in the form of photons that have traveled for millions of years to reach the back of your eye on a cold night. The universe is not raising its voice. The universe is barely speaking at all. Most of what it has to say comes in the form of silence, distance, and patience. And to listen to it is to be willing, for a while, to sit with that silence without rushing to fill it with the comforts you might prefer. The next part of the story is not a turn back toward warmth. It is a turn further into what this silence finally means for those who exist inside it. Not as a lesson, not as a moral, but as a final unfolding of consequence, the kind that does not soften under examination, and the kind that cannot be undone by any wish, instrument, or insight that we have yet invented or imagined. To sit with the silence of the universe is to confront a particular kind of isolation that human language is not well equipped to describe. It is not the isolation of being alone in a room. It is not the isolation of being lost in a forest. It is not even the isolation of being adrift at sea, with the horizon empty in every direction. Those forms of isolation still assume a world around the lonely figure, a planet beneath their feet, an atmosphere above their head, a possibility, however faint, of being found. Cosmic isolation is different. It is the isolation of being one small lit point inside a structure whose dominant condition is darkness, and whose long trajectory is toward more darkness still. You begin to sense on this scale that isolation is not an event that happens to a being. It is the resting state of the universe itself. Connection is the exception. Gathering is the exception. Light, sound, signal, contact, all of these are local conveniences that depend on the rare conditions inside structures like galaxies. Outside those structures, in the vast volume of the cosmos, the default condition has always been separation, and the default is patiently reasserting itself. The story of cosmic isolation, traced from small to large, becomes a kind of slow opening into a deeper feeling. At first you think of isolation as the distance between two people in different cities, then between two cities on different continents, then between two continents on a single planet, then between two planets in a single solar system. And already, at that scale, the silences become extreme. The fastest signals we can send between worlds in our own system take many minutes to arrive, sometimes hours. Conversations between such worlds, if any existed there, would not be conversations at all. They would be slow exchanges of stretched messages, with long gaps between each reply. Now extend the picture outward. Between two stars in our own galaxy, light itself, the fastest messenger in the universe, takes years to cross from one to the other. Between two galaxies, millions of years. Between two galaxy clusters, hundreds of millions, even billions. At those distances, the very idea of an exchange of messages becomes almost meaningless. A civilization sending a signal across such a gulf cannot expect any reply within its own lifetime, or within the lifetime of its species, or even within the lifetime of its planet's biosphere. The universe is too large for conversation, and it gets worse. Because as the expansion of space continues, the distances between independent cosmic structures grow, and the time required for any signal to cross them lengthens. The very possibility of meaningful long-distance contact, fragile to begin with, becomes more fragile still. The universe is not just immense, it is becoming more immense, and the immensity is being constructed precisely along the directions any signal would need to travel. You begin to feel very quietly that the cosmos has built into its geometry a profound resistance to communion. The structures that allow life and intelligence to arise are small islands. The distances between those islands are unforgiving. The fabric between them is stretching, and the signals that might bridge them are slow, weak, and easily lost in the noise of cosmic background radiation. If any other intelligences exist in this universe, they are almost certainly so far away in either space or time that we will never confirm them. And this leads to something more disturbing, because even within our own visible cosmos, the isolation is not stable, it is deepening. The galaxies beyond our local group are already receding from us in ways that will, over time, place them permanently out of reach. The other clusters and superclusters we can presently see are, in the long view, being carried away by the same expansion that gave them their separation in the first place. The cosmic neighborhood we currently inhabit is shrinking, not in size, but in connection. The houses on our street are drifting apart, and the streets themselves are being lengthened beneath them. You imagine for a moment what it would be like to live in a future galaxy that has lost sight of all other galaxies. The night sky there would be dominated by the stars of that galaxy alone. There would be no faint smudges marking distant cosmic neighbors. No telescopes, no matter how powerful, would find them. The cosmos, to the eyes and instruments of any observers inside that galaxy, would consist of a single island floating in an apparently infinite darkness. And the darkness would not be a mystery to be unraveled. It would simply be the state of things, the default, the accepted background. To such future observers, our current universe, with its visible cosmic web, its detectable microwave background, its long exposure photographs revealing thousands of distant galaxies, would be a fantasy, a myth, a claim that they could neither confirm nor disprove from observation. Without the evidence, the larger cosmos would not even be a question for them. It would simply be missing. And this is one of the strangest realizations the modern view of the universe forces upon you. The cosmos as a knowable structure depends on the cosmos being legible from inside, and legibility is not guaranteed. It is a temporary condition. The very expansion that defines the long fate of the universe is also the process by which the universe gradually denies its own legibility to its own observers. The information is not destroyed in any local sense. It is simply placed, by the lengthening of space, beyond the reach of anything that might receive it. You begin to wonder in a quiet way whether the universe is in some sense always doing this, whether every era of observers on every kind of world, in every corner of the cosmos that briefly produces minds, sees only a slice of the larger reality. The earliest possible observers, if any existed in the first generations after the cosmos cooled, would have seen one kind of universe, hot and dense and turbulent. We see another. The far future observers will see another still. None of these views will be complete. Each one will be a partial portrait painted with the only light available at that moment in cosmic time. And this means that there may be no single privileged vantage point from which the whole story of the universe could ever be read. The information is spread across epochs in a way that no single observer can fully gather. The history is not hidden in some inaccessible place. It is distributed across time, across regions, across wavelengths in ways that no instrument, no civilization, no intelligence will ever fully integrate. The complete universe, as a single coherent narrative, may not be observable to anyone, anywhere, ever. The strange part is not that the universe is empty. The strange part is what that emptiness implies about knowledge. It implies that the deepest truths of the cosmos are not just hard to find. They are, in part, structurally hidden. The universe arranges itself in such a way that no observer inside it can ever fully step back and see all of it at once. The view is always partial. The map is always incomplete. The story is always being told in fragments to listeners who arrive in the middle and leave before the end. And yet within that constraint there is something quietly remarkable about the kind of universe we happen to inhabit, not because it was made for us, not because we are special, but because the timing of our existence falls within a stretch of cosmic time in which a surprising amount of the story is still legible. The cosmic web is still mappable. The early light still reaches us. The galaxies still cluster in patterns we can study. The expansion is detectable. The dark matter is inferable. The dark energy, however mysterious, is measurable in its effects. None of these things would be true for an observer arriving sufficiently late. They are true for us only because we have arrived in time. But timing is not the same as permanence. The fact that we can see the cosmos in this much detail does not mean the cosmos is committed to remaining this visible. The same processes that allow our current observation are the processes that will gradually undo it. We are reading a book whose pages are being slowly torn out behind us as we turn each one. Future readers will not have access to the chapters we have already read. They will not be able to verify our conclusions. They will live in a universe that has fewer hints, fewer signals, fewer reachable structures, and they will have to make sense of it with what little they can still detect. And it gets worse. Because as the cosmos thins and the signals grow weaker and the structures drift further apart, even the local conditions that support observation become harder to maintain. Stars in our own galaxy are aging. The supply of cold gas needed to make new stars is being slowly consumed. Eventually, even our galaxy will become a dim collection of old, low-mass stars and quiet remnants. The conditions that make a vibrant biosphere possible on any single planet depend, in subtle ways, on the larger health of stellar populations and their cycles of birth, death, and renewal. Those cycles are not eternal. They are running down too. You imagine a planet, billions of years from now, orbiting one of the last red dwarfs in a galaxy whose brighter stars have long since faded. Above it, a dim sky of ancient stars and quiet remnants. Around it, the dark of expanding space with no other galaxies visible. If any minds exist on such a world, they will have inherited a universe more silent than ours, more empty, more closed. They may still wonder, they may still ask, but the answers available to them will be fewer. And further still, in even deeper futures, when the last small stars have exhausted their fuel and only stellar remnants and slowly evaporating black holes remain, the conditions for any kind of complex observer become extreme. The universe will not yet be over. It will still contain matter. It will still contain energy. But the differences that allow chemistry, biology, awareness will have grown so faint, so spread out, that even the longest stretches of time may struggle to produce any new local pockets of complexity. There is, in this picture, a kind of long evening descending across the cosmos, the brightness behind us, the dimness ahead, the slow, almost imperceptible darkening of every direction. Not a moment, not a catastrophe, just the patient unfolding of physical law into its long consequence. And here in the heart of this long evening, the existential meaning of cosmic emptiness becomes harder to look away from, because the universe, as it really is, does not seem to be moving toward a destination of greater meaning, greater connection, greater communion of beings. It seems to be moving toward greater separation, greater silence, greater darkness. The local triumphs of structure, life and awareness, however meaningful they may feel from inside, occur against a background that is, in the long run, indifferent to them and unfriendly to their continuation. The disturbing part is what that emptiness is doing to any narrative we might want to tell about the cosmos. Stories prefer arcs. They prefer beginnings, middles, and endings that resolve into meaning. The universe, viewed in its deepest unfolding, refuses to cooperate with that preference. It has something like a beginning, hot and dense and full of energy. It has something like a long middle, in which structures form and lights burn and minds occasionally arise. And it has something like an ending in which structures dissolve, lights fade, and minds, if any are still possible, find themselves stranded in a thinner, colder, dimmer arrangement of remnants. None of this is hostile. That is the part that becomes hardest to absorb. There is no enemy in this story. There is no villain. There is no malevolent force tearing the cosmos apart. There is only the impersonal arithmetic of expansion, entropy, and the fundamental constants of physics unfolding without preference, without judgment, without awareness of what they are leaving behind. And it is this indifference that gives the long story its weight. Hostility, terrible as it would be, would at least imply a relationship. An enemy is a kind of presence. An enemy notices you. An enemy is in some sense interested in your existence, even if only to oppose it. The universe is not hostile. It is something stranger. It is a place where the conditions for your existence arise temporarily, persist for a brief stretch of cosmic time, and then dissolve, with no one and nothing pausing to mark the transition. You feel perhaps for the first time the weight of cosmic indifference, not as something cruel, not as something monstrous, as something simply, structurally, unconcerned. The universe is not trying to remove you. It is not aware of your existence. It is not aware of anything. It is a vast set of processes following physical law, with no internal voice to call out the names of what is being lost. The fading of stars, the unraveling of clusters, the disappearance of galaxies behind the horizon. None of these events register anywhere within the universe itself, except inside the brief minds that happen to be alive to witness them. And the deeper you look, the less comforting it becomes, because you begin to realize that even the awareness you bring to all of this, the very capacity to perceive the cosmic story, is a temporary local arrangement. Your awareness is not exempt from the same forces it is contemplating. The matter that makes your body, the energy that powers your thoughts, the structures of your brain that allow these particular reflections, are all subject to the same long unwinding. The universe is not making a special case for the observer. It applies the same physics to the watcher and the watched. And yet here, In this strange middle of the story, the watcher exists. For a while, for a thin stretch of cosmic time, long enough to see the patterns, long enough to ask the questions, long enough to feel the weight of the answers. That is not a triumph. That is not a vindication. That is simply a fact of timing. The universe permitted, for a brief season, the existence of minds that could look back at it. It did not have to. The same physical laws with slightly different parameters could have produced a cosmos that never crossed the threshold of observability. The same long fading could be happening in a universe with no one inside it to notice. In some sense, that is what awaits this universe in its deep future. The fact that we are here, now, looking, asking, mapping, naming, is not a defeat of cosmic indifference. The universe will continue its long unwinding whether we watch it or not. But our watching is its own small event. A brief, local, fragile occurrence inside the broader story. Not central, not necessary, simply present. And there is a certain kind of weight that settles in once you accept this. Not despair exactly, not panic, something quieter. A kind of low, steady recognition. The recognition that the universe is not arranged for your comfort. It is not arranged at all. It is unfolding. And the unfolding produced, briefly, the conditions in which you could exist long enough to glimpse the larger pattern. Beyond that, no further guarantees are offered. The strange part is not that the universe is empty. The strange part is that even knowing this, the night sky remains beautiful. The stars still feel like presences. The galaxies still feel like company. The cosmic web, glimpsed in long exposure surveys, still feels like something almost alive. Knowing the long fate does not erase the immediate experience. Knowing that the cosmos is moving toward silence does not silence the present moment. The light is still arriving. The patterns are still legible. The wonder, dark as it has become, is still real. And there is something instructive in that persistence. The cosmos does not need you to celebrate it for its beauty to register on your senses. It does not need you to ignore the long fate in order for you to feel the present moment. You can hold both at once, the brightness and the fading, the structure and the unraveling, the connection and the slow severance. None of these cancel each other out. They coexist, layered into the same view of the same sky. To live, even briefly, inside a universe like this is to occupy a strange double position. You are both an observer of an enormous pattern and a small thread inside that pattern. You can step back, mentally, and consider the cosmic web from the outside, mapping its shapes, tracing its evolution, imagining its long futures. And then you can return to the immediate fact of your own existence, located on a small world, inside a single galaxy, drifting in one small region of the larger structure. Both views are true. Both views are partial. Neither erases the other. And the more carefully you sit with this, the more clearly you see that the universe, in its long story, is not about you. It is not about any of us. It is not about life. It is not about intelligence. It is not about meaning. These are local concerns. They matter inside the small regions where they arise. They do not extend to the cosmic scale. The cosmic scale is governed by other things: gravity, expansion, energy, entropy. Those forces have no preferences. They will continue to operate after every observer is gone. In the long silent eons when no awareness remains to record their effects, there is a particular kind of loneliness in this realization. Not the loneliness of being alone in a crowd, not the loneliness of being misunderstood, the loneliness of being a kind of being whose interests, hopes, attachments, fears, and curiosities are simply not addressed by the larger fabric of reality. The universe does not refuse to address them. It is not capable of addressing anything. It is not a speaker. It is a setting. A vast, patient, indifferent setting in which small voices briefly arise and then return to silence. And yet, even inside this loneliness, there is a kind of strange clarity, because once you stop expecting the universe to confirm or deny your significance, you can stop measuring yourself against a backdrop that was never going to play that role. The cosmos will not save you. It will not love you. It will not punish you. It will not remember you. And in that absence of cosmic response, the local meanings you build with other minds, on this small world, in this brief window, do not become trivial. If anything, they become starker. They are not echoes of some grand cosmic plan. They are entirely your own, small, fragile, brief, and yours. There is no moral lesson in this. The cosmos is not trying to teach you anything by being the way it is. It simply is the way it is. The fact that some local minds find meaning in the contemplation of its structure is one of the many strange byproducts of its unfolding. The fact that other minds find dread instead is another. The cosmos does not distinguish between the response of awe and the response of fear. It does not register either. It does not register anything. And so the story of the universe, traced from the first bright pages through the long evening of structures and lights, ends not with a confrontation, not with a resolution, not with a final twist that restores some hidden purpose, but with a kind of quiet diminishment. The galaxies that we have come to know will become unreachable. The cosmic web will dissolve into its component remnants. The remnants will cool. The radiation will fade. The temperature will inch toward its lower limit. The differences will smooth out. The cosmos will become, slowly, what it has always been tending toward beneath its temporary brightness, a vast, patient, almost featureless silence. That silence is the final shape of the long story. Not a roar, not a collapse, not a verdict, just an end of contrast. The cosmic web, glimpsed across hundreds of millions of light years in our current era, is the most ornate pattern the universe has ever produced. From it, everything else fades, slowly, without urgency, without farewell. And here, at the edge of that long fading, the question that began this entire exploration finally bends back upon itself. The question of what the universe really is, when seen clearly, with all its emptiness and structure and invisible forces and accelerating expansion and slow entropy and patient indifference. The answer is not a single sentence. It is the entire trajectory. The cosmos is whatever this whole long story is, not just its early brightness, not just its current beauty, not just its long, dim future. All of it, together, a continuous unfolding from heat to cold, from density to dispersion, from contrast to silence. And you are inside that unfolding, reading it, watching it, sitting beneath its night sky on a small world in a small galaxy, embedded in a thinning cosmic web inside an expanding universe whose own future is moving in directions you can describe but cannot stop. That is the position you occupy. That is the only position any of us occupy. The cosmos does not offer a better seat. There is no other vantage point available. The next and final part of the story does not lift this weight. It does not promise comfort. It does not pretend that the long evening will bend in its last hour into a sudden new dawn. It does something else. It looks, calmly and steadily, at what remains when all the previous chapters have been told. It looks at the universe in its final long phase, and at what it means to have briefly been an observer inside the time when the lights were still burning. And in that final looking, the documentary itself approaches its own quiet ending. Not as a conclusion that resolves the cosmos, but as a slow setting down of one small voice that, for a little while, attempted to describe it. There is a kind of stillness that arrives when you finally allow the long story of the cosmos to settle into its full shape inside your mind. It is not peace, exactly. It is not acceptance either. It is something quieter and stranger. A recognition that the universe is not a setting waiting to be interpreted, not a stage waiting for an act, not a question waiting for an answer. It is instead a long unfolding that does not pause to be understood and does not pause to be misunderstood. It simply continues, at its own pace, in its own direction, regardless of whether any mind is awake inside it. And in that stillness, the final phase of the cosmic story can be approached with something resembling clarity. Not the clarity of solved problems, but the clarity of looking directly at a landscape one no longer expects to control. The landscape stretches in every direction, and you stand somewhere near its center. Not because you are central, but because every observer feels central from where they happen to stand. The far future of the universe, traced as carefully as our equations and observations allow, has no single dramatic moment to it. There is no final chord. There is no closing curtain. There is only a long gradient descent of contrast, a slow dimming of every available difference, a patient widening of every reachable horizon, until what remains is a cosmos that no longer arranges itself into anything we would recognize as structure. In the era we sometimes call the long dark, after the last stars and even the longest-lived populations have exhausted their fuel, the visible cosmos as we know it will be effectively over. Galaxies will no longer be bright collections of burning suns. They will be loose drifts of cooling remnants, slowly thinning under the gentle pressure of gravitational encounters and the lengthening of space. The night sky on any surviving world, if any surviving worlds remain in such an era, will have no comparable counterpart in our own time. There will be no streaks of luminous galaxies, no clouds of glowing dust, only the dim, patient afterglow of corpses, scattered across a darkening volume. And it gets worse, because over even longer timescales, the structures that bind those remnants together begin to give way. Stellar remnants drifting through their host galaxies occasionally pass close to one another, exchanging tiny amounts of energy in slow gravitational nudges. Over enough time, these encounters accumulate. Some remnants are flung outward into the surrounding emptiness. Others sink deeper into the centers of their galaxies, where they meet the immense gravity of the central black holes. The galaxies themselves, over timescales beyond any human imagination, slowly disintegrate as objects, sending their components into the dark or feeding them into central wells of gravity that grow ever more massive. The era of black holes follows. A long, deep, almost incomprehensibly extended phase of cosmic history in which the most prominent remaining structures are not galaxies, not clusters, not even remnants in any familiar sense, but enormous black holes presiding over volumes of nearly empty space. Even these, however, are not eternal, are not. According to the best current understanding, black holes radiate slowly, releasing energy in a thin, almost imperceptible trickle that adds up, over unimaginable spans of time, to a complete evaporation. The numbers involved here defy meaningful comparison. The ages of stars, the lifetimes of galaxies, even the current age of the universe itself, become rounding errors against the timescales required for the largest black holes to fade. By those scales, the time we have spent contemplating the cosmos is less than a single flicker, and yet the equations describing this fading do not flinch. They simply continue, indifferent to the scale they are pointing toward. After the black holes have evaporated, the universe enters a phase that is harder to describe in any vivid way. The structures that defined its first long acts are gone. The bright stars, the thriving galaxies, the cosmic web, the dense knots of clusters, even the dim afterlives of stellar remnants and the immense slow shadows of black holes. What remains is a thinly spread haze of stable particles, low-energy photons stretched to wavelengths almost beyond imagination, and a vast volume of space that has been expanded so far that no 2 points of any interest are close enough to influence one another. There is, in such a state, no meaningful concept of an event. Nothing happens because nothing is concentrated. Nothing flows because there is no gradient. Nothing changes in any way that an observer could mark, because there are no observers. And even if there were, there would be no contrasts left for them to mark. The universe persists, in some technical sense, but it has lost the kind of internal life that allowed it to be a setting for anything. And here, you confront one of the strangest features of the cosmic story, because the universe, in its full timeline, is not symmetrical. The first long phases, hot and dense and full of becoming, produced a remarkable richness of structures, forces, and possibilities. The middle phase, in which we currently live, has carried that richness forward in increasingly organized forms, with stars, galaxies, planets, and at least one example of awareness arising along the way. But the final phases, stretching forward into timescales that dwarf everything we have so far considered, contain almost nothing comparable. The long evening of the cosmos is far longer than its bright morning. The silence outweighs the song by margins so extreme that the song begins to look like a brief anomaly. The strange part is not that the universe is empty. The strange part is how disproportionate the silence is to the brightness. We sometimes imagine the cosmic story as a balanced narrative, with a beginning, a middle, and an end of roughly comparable weight. The actual proportions are nothing like that. The phase in which the universe is interesting, observable, structurally rich is brief. The phase in which it is silent, smooth, and inert is enormous. We are not living in the typical state of the universe. We are living in one of its rare temporary alignments where matter and energy still allow patterns to form. And this gives the present moment a peculiar weight, not because we are central to the cosmos, not because we are observed by it, but because the conditions that allow us to exist at all are themselves rare in the long view. The bright universe is not the rule. It is a small exception, held briefly in the middle of a much longer story, and we, somehow, find ourselves inside that exception. You begin to understand why some thinkers have used phrases like islands of order against a sea of disorder, not as a poetic flourish, but as a reasonably accurate description of the actual cosmic situation. The galaxies are islands. The stars within them are smaller islands. The planets around those stars are smaller islands still, and on at least one of those planets, in a single thin film of chemistry, life has arranged itself into yet smaller islands, until eventually, in certain configurations, awareness arises. Each of these levels is a small local resistance against the larger smoothing tendency of the cosmos. None of them are permanent. All of them are temporary, And it gets worse. Because the temporary nature of these islands is not a flaw or a mistake. It is built directly into the physical law that allowed them to form in the first place. The same gradient of energy that powers stars also ensures their eventual exhaustion. The same gravitational logic that gathers galaxies also slowly disperses them in the long run. The same conditions that allow brains to operate also guarantee that those brains will eventually break down. The universe does not have a special rule that says complex structures must end. The end is implicit in the rules that allow them to begin. There is no escape from this through any imaginable advance in knowledge or technology. There may be vast amounts that future intelligences, if any, continue to exist, can do to extend their local conditions, to maintain pockets of order longer than would otherwise be possible. But no amount of cleverness can repeal the underlying direction. No civilization can rebuild the energy gradients of the early universe. No engineering can reverse the global expansion of space. No instrument can reach across a future horizon to retrieve a galaxy that the cosmos has placed permanently out of reach. The fundamental shape of the story remains as it is, and yet, knowing all of this, you find yourself returning, again and again, to the present moment. To the small lit immediate fact of being alive inside a cosmos that allows for now, the existence of minds capable of asking these questions. The questions themselves, after all, are also part of the cosmic story. They are not foreign to it. They are not extra. They are one of the many local phenomena that the universe has briefly produced. They will not last, but they exist now. There is a tempting move, at this point in such a story, to soften everything with a final consolation. To say that meaning is what we make of it. To say that the brevity of the bright epoch only makes it more precious. To say that being alive at this moment is a kind of cosmic luck that we should treasure. These statements are not exactly false, but they are not exactly right either. They are the kind of comforts we reach for when we cannot bear to sit with the indifference of the larger picture. The universe is not interested in whether we treasure this moment. It is not interested in whether we make meaning of anything. It will continue its long unwinding whether we celebrate or mourn or remain silent. The comfort, if any is to be found, is not handed down from the cosmos. It can only be handed sideways, from one small mind to another, inside the brief window when such handing is possible. And it goes deeper, because the silence of the cosmos toward our existence is also, in a strange way, a kind of freedom. The universe is not watching. It is not judging. It is not requiring any particular performance from you. It is not assigning roles. It is not handing out scripts. Whatever you make of the time you have, whatever attention you pay to the night sky, whatever attention you fail to pay, the cosmos does not care. That indifference, hard as it is, also leaves the space of meaning entirely in the hands of the small, local minds that briefly occupy it. The disturbing part is what that emptiness is doing not only to the future of the cosmos but to the imagination of every observer inside it. Because once you have seen the long evening clearly, you can no longer pretend you have not seen it. You can return to ordinary life. You can attend to small things. You can love and worry and work and laugh. But somewhere in the background, the awareness lingers. The awareness that the night sky is fading by inches across eons. The awareness that every fire is a small loan against a finite supply. The awareness that the universe is in the process of dismantling, in slow motion, the very conditions that produced you. This awareness does not need to dominate your days. It does not need to be the loudest voice in your head. But it does change the texture of certain quiet moments. Standing outside on a cold night, looking up at the stars, you no longer see only beauty. You see a phase, a long, slow, glittering middle of a story that does not end where you might wish it ended. And the stars themselves, knowing nothing of your reflections, continue to burn at their own pace, indifferent to whether anyone is watching. And you begin to suspect that this is exactly what the night sky has always been. A vast unfolding indifferent to its witnesses, briefly intersecting with minds that try to read it, and continuing on long after those minds have fallen silent. The wonder you feel when you look up is real. The dread that occasionally accompanies that wonder is also real. Both are local responses inside a brief window. Neither alters the larger pattern in any way. There is something almost tender, then, in the act of looking up at all. Not because the cosmos is tender, it is not, but because the looking itself is one of those small, fragile arrangements that the universe has briefly permitted. A creature on a planet on a small spiral arm of a moderately sized galaxy, lifting its eyes toward distant points of light that left their sources long before any of its ancestors existed. The act is improbable. The act is temporary. The act is, in the long view, also part of the silence that will eventually arrive. But for now, it is happening. For now, you are looking. And in that looking, the entire long story of the universe is, in a quiet way, present. The early hot density, the slow formation of structure, the lighting of stars, the gathering of galaxies, the stretching of the cosmic web, the carving of voids, the arrival of dark energy as a dominant force, the slow drift toward isolation, the long dissipation of energy into thinner and thinner forms. All of it is implicit in the photons reaching your eyes from across the dark. None of it is concealed. The universe is telling its story in plain view, in the only language it has, which is light and silence. The deeper you look, the less comforting it becomes, but also the more honest it becomes. The cosmos does not lie. It does not promise. It does not threaten. It simply unfolds. Our discomfort with that unfolding is our own. The cosmos shows us its size, its emptiness, its expansion, its slow fade, without distortion, if we are willing to receive these signals carefully. The misunderstandings are ours. The disappointments are ours. The wonder, too, is ours. And here, near the end of this slow descent through the layers of cosmic emptiness, you can feel a kind of final consequence settling in. It is not a lesson. It is not a moral. It is something more like a quiet shape that you have come to recognize. The universe is not moving toward meaning in the way human stories tend to. It is not moving toward revelation in the way mystery novels tend to. It is not even moving toward an ending in the dramatic sense. It is moving toward dispersal, toward dilution, toward the slow disappearance of every difference that might have made one moment distinguishable from another. And in that movement, every observer becomes, eventually, an isolated point inside a shrinking island of visibility. First, distant galaxies fade beyond the horizon. Then, the structures that bind groups of galaxies dissolve in the long term. Then, even the brightness of one's own local neighborhood diminishes as its stars age and its remnants cool. Then finally, in eras so far ahead they no longer feel like time, even the conditions for observation itself fade away. We are not at that endpoint. We are far from it, but we are oriented toward it. The arrow of the cosmic story points there, not because anyone aimed it, but because the equations of physics working themselves out across vast time naturally lead in that direction. We can resist that direction locally in the sense that life, civilization, and inquiry are themselves brief local resistances. We cannot resist it globally. The global trajectory has no interest in our preferences, and so when you stand beneath the night sky tonight knowing all of this, you stand inside a strange double awareness. You are inside the universe at one of its brightest, richest, most legible phases. And you are inside the universe at a moment that is, on the cosmic scale, a small distance into a long, slow fading. Both are true. The brightness is real. The fading is real. The two are not in contradiction. They are simply two views of the same continuous unfolding. You feel perhaps that you have crossed some threshold of understanding by simply having held this entire picture in your mind for a while. You have not solved the universe. You have not stopped its long unwinding. You have not earned any cosmic favor by paying attention. You have simply joined briefly the small population of minds that have, at various moments in cosmic history, tried to look honestly at the shape of the thing they were inside of. There is no triumph in that. There is no defeat in it either. There is only a particular kind of quiet recognition. The recognition that the cosmos is what it is. The recognition that we are inside it, briefly. The recognition that the brightness we celebrate is borrowed from gradients that are slowly closing. The recognition that the silence we sense between the stars is not just a gap, but a foretaste. The recognition that the universe is not addressing us, and never was, and that the meanings we find are meanings we have invented in small companies, on small worlds, in small windows of time. And in that recognition, the final unsettling feeling is not fear. It is something more difficult to name. Something close to the sensation of standing in an immense dimly lit hall, knowing that the lights will continue to fade, knowing that the walls extend further than any walk could reach, knowing that the voices of others in the hall are also temporary, and yet still being there, still breathing, still aware, still capable of noticing the strange particular quality of the present moment inside such a place. The night sky, after all of this, becomes a different kind of presence, not a friend. Not an enemy, not a teacher, just a vast, slow surface above your small life, written in old light, mapping a structure that is mostly empty, expanding into a future that will be emptier still. You can love it, in your own way, knowing what it is, You can be unsettled by it in your own way, knowing what it is. You can do both at once. The cosmos does not require you to choose, and the final consequence of all of this, traced honestly to its quiet endpoint, is something like this. The universe is not a place moving toward greater connection. It is moving toward greater separation. It is not moving toward greater warmth. It is moving toward greater cold. It is not moving toward greater contrast. It is moving toward smoother sameness. It is not moving toward more available light. It is moving toward less. It is not moving toward more meaning. It is moving toward less, even of the conditions in which meaning can be made. And every observer sooner or later becomes trapped inside a shrinking island of visibility. First, that island still contains many galaxies. Then, fewer. Then, only one. Then, only fragments of one. Then, only remnants, dimmed and scattered. Then, ultimately, nothing that could be called visibility at all. The shrinking is not violent. The shrinking is patient. The shrinking is built into the geometry of an expanding cosmos in which the speed of light is fixed and the rate of expansion is not. You are not at the final stage of that shrinking. You are at one of its earlier stages. The night sky still shows you galaxies. The cosmic web is still mappable. The ancient light still reaches your instruments. But the direction is set. The horizons are growing. The light is reddening. The structures are thinning. The future is being prepared, not by any will, but simply by the continuation of what is already underway. And so the cosmos, in the end, does not deliver a final scene. It delivers a long descent into a state that has no scenes at all. The bright epochs we live in and study are the last places in the cosmic story where scenes are possible. After them, only the slow smoothing remains. The cosmos is, in this sense, gradually unmaking the conditions for storytelling itself, including this story, including the listening minds, including the night skies above all future worlds. The universe is not hostile. It would almost be easier if it were. Hostility could be opposed, named, fought against in some symbolic way, even hopelessly. Indifference offers no such handle. The cosmos is not at war with anything. It is not against you. It is not for you. It is simply not arranged around you at all. The long fading is not a punishment. It is not a verdict. It is the natural shape of a universe governed by the laws we have come to know, applied to enormous spans of time. And in that indifference, the final emotional consequence settles, almost gently into place. Not despair, not panic, not surrender. Something quieter than any of these. A kind of low, steady awareness that the world above your head is far stranger than the comforting picture of a starry sky might suggest, that the silence between the stars is not waiting for an answer, that the distance is not waiting for a bridge, that the long evening is not waiting for a dawn, that the universe is, in its honest form, a slow, patient, immense unfolding that does not turn back, does not pause, and does not, in any sense we have yet detected, look at us. You step back inside. The cold of the night fades from your skin. The familiar walls of a small room return around you. The cosmos remains where it has always been, above the roof, beyond the horizon, stretching in every direction, fading by inches, at a pace too slow for any single life to notice. You return to the small island of your hours and your concerns. The vast story continues without your attention. It would have continued without your attention all along. And yet, having looked even briefly into that vastness, you carry something quiet with you. A recognition, a weight, a kind of cold companion that does not speak, but does not entirely leave. The cosmos has been described to you, as honestly as we currently know how, in its emptiness, its hidden structures, its accelerating expansion, its long entropy, its inevitable fading. You are not asked to do anything with this information. You are not asked to feel any particular way about it. You are simply, having heard it, now one of the small population of minds in which this picture briefly resides. The night sky above your home tonight is the same sky that has hung over every previous generation of observers, and it is also, very slightly, not the same. It is older. It is more stretched. It is, by infinitesimal amounts, further along its long fade than the sky that hung over any earlier eye. The differences are too small to perceive in a single life, but over the timescales we have traced, they accumulate into the entire long story of the cosmos. Somewhere far above, beyond the soft glow of your local sky, the cosmic web hangs in its full strange beauty, threads of galaxies braided around vast hollow voids, all of it moving in slow gravitational currents, all of it stretched by the same expanding fabric of space, all of it shaped by the invisible mass we call dark matter, and pulled apart by the invisible pressure we call dark energy. The structure is real. The emptiness is real. The fading is real. None of it is for anyone. All of it is briefly available to anyone willing to look. The universe will continue. The fading will continue. The horizons will keep closing. The galaxies will keep slipping out of reach. The remnants will keep cooling. The contrasts will keep smoothing. The silence will keep deepening. And somewhere, for a little while longer on a small world inside one small galaxy embedded in this thinning cosmic architecture, minds will keep looking up, asking questions, mapping the patterns, naming the forces, and feeling, in their own quiet way, both the brightness and the long descent at once. That is the final image. Not a triumphant ending, not a closing revelation, just a small lit window in the side of a vast dark hall, with the cosmos stretching outward in every direction, mostly empty, mostly silent, mostly indifferent. And inside that window, for a moment longer, a watcher remains, still able to see the stars, still able to trace the cosmic web, still able to feel the cold edge of what is to come, and still, somehow, willing to keep looking, here, on beyond the universe, for as long as the light continues to arrive. The watcher in that small lit window is not a special figure. It is not chosen. It is not protected. It is simply the position any of us occupies when we pause for a moment to consider the larger shape of the place we are inside. The window is small because awareness itself is small. The hall is vast because the cosmos is vast. The disproportion between the two is not corrected by any insight, any feeling, any prayer, any equation. The disproportion is the basic fact of the situation, and it is in living with that disproportion that the final and most quietly unsettling layer of the cosmic story begins to make itself felt. Because the more honestly you accept how small the lit window is, and how vast and indifferent the hall, the more clearly you begin to see that the lit window is also temporary. It is not just outnumbered by the dark, it is outlasted by it. The dark was there before the window opened, and the dark will be there long after the window closes, and the dark does not register the opening or the closing in any way that matters to it. This is the part of the story that no amount of poetic phrasing can fully soften. The universe will not always contain observers. It will not always contain the conditions that produce observers. There is no guarantee, anywhere in the laws of physics, that awareness is a permanent feature of reality. There is only evidence that it has arisen here briefly, on at least one world, inside a phase of cosmic history that allowed for the right gradients to exist. Those gradients are being spent, the phase is passing, and nothing in the structure of the cosmos is committed to producing another phase like it. You begin to feel in a quiet and almost reluctant way that awareness itself may be a kind of cosmic accident, not a goal toward which the universe was striving, not a final flower of cosmic evolution, just one of the many local arrangements that happen to become possible when matter, energy, and time aligned in particular ways. The universe did not need awareness to unfold. It is unfolding regardless. The brief presence of minds inside it is one of its byproducts, not its purpose. And the unsettling consequence of this is what it implies about the relationship between awareness and the universe itself. There is no relationship in any reciprocal sense. The cosmos does not perceive its observers. It does not register their interest. It does not adjust itself to their presence. It does not even maintain the conditions for their continued existence with anything approaching attention. The conditions remain because of physical inertia. When that inertia changes, the conditions change with it, regardless of who or what depended on them. The strange part is not that the universe is empty. The strange part is what that emptiness implies about the entire enterprise of meaning-making. Every story ever told, every song ever sung, every photograph ever taken, every memory ever cherished, every name ever spoken, every face ever loved, every voice that ever rose against the night to declare itself present. All of these have occurred inside the lit window. None of them have reached beyond it. The cosmos does not contain a record of them in any place outside the small region of space and time in which they briefly occurred. There is no cosmic archive. There is no celestial memory. There is no place in the universe where the meanings we have made are stored after the minds that made them are gone. The matter that held them disperses. The energy that powered them spreads. The patterns dissolve into smoother distributions. The information in the strict physical sense may continue to exist in some form, encoded in correlations across particles, but it does so without anything to retrieve it, without anything to read it, without anything to recognize what it once was. Information without an observer is not memory. It is just noise that happens to have a structure no one will ever notice. And it gets worse, because this is true not only for individual minds and individual moments, but for entire civilizations, entire biospheres, entire planetary histories. Whatever happens on a world over the course of its livable era, however rich, however complex, however heartbreaking or beautiful, becomes eventually undifferentiated material drifting in a dimming cosmos. The world itself does not last. The star it orbits does not last. The galaxy it belongs to does not last in any recognizable form. The entire chain of inheritance fades back into the background from which it briefly emerged. You feel the weight of this most clearly, perhaps, when you think of the future deep enough, not the next year, not the next century, not the next millennium, far beyond those into time spans that dwarf the existence of your species, your planet, your sun, your galaxy. In those deeper futures, nothing you have ever done will be locatable. Nothing you have ever loved will be visible. Nothing your civilization has ever built or written or imagined will have a place in any sky. The lights you stand under tonight will have changed beyond recognition or vanished entirely. The geography of the cosmos itself will be a different geography, one in which the very arrangement of structures that defines our present sky will no longer apply. And yet none of this changes the fact that you are here now. The disproportion does not erase the present. The future silence does not silence this moment. The eventual dispersal does not undo the current arrangement. You stand inside the lit window. You see the night sky. You feel the cold. You sense the strangeness. All of this is real, even if all of it is temporary. Temporariness is not the opposite of reality. It is one of reality's most common forms. There is something almost severe in the honesty required to sit with both of these truths at once. The reality of the present moment. The reality of its eventual disappearance. Neither is allowed to cancel the other. Neither is allowed to win the argument. They coexist, like the brightness and the fading, like the structure and the void, like the cosmic web and the silence inside its cells. You are inside both at once because the universe is inside both at once. And the universe, in its final long phase, does not soften this severity. It does not turn at the last moment toward warmth. It does not, near the end of its long unfolding, reveal a hidden purpose that recasts the previous story in a kinder light. The equations point where they point. The expansion continues. The entropy increases. The contrast smooth. The horizons close. The remnants cool. There is no twist. There is no reversal. There is only the patient continuation of the same direction, over scales so vast that human imagination cannot accompany them in any vivid way. The final stages of cosmic history, traced in the most careful terms our current physics allows, do not contain any version of you. They do not contain any version of life as we know it. They do not contain any structures recognizable as galaxies. They do not contain any stars. They do not contain anything that would deserve the name of a sky. They contain only a vast, thinned, almost featureless spread of low-energy radiation and stable particles, drifting in a volume so large that the very concept of location loses much of its weight. In such a state, even the word universe begins to feel strange. The cosmos as a thing in motion, as a structure in development, as a setting for events, has effectively ended. What remains is the residue of all that motion, brought to a state in which no further motion of consequence is possible. There is no longer anything to call an era, because nothing distinguishes one moment of it from another. There is no longer anything to call a place, because nothing distinguishes one region of it from another. There is only continuation, in the thinnest possible sense, without anything for the continuation to bear. And here, at the most distant edge of the cosmic story, you confront a particular kind of conclusion, not a conclusion that resolves anything, not a conclusion that satisfies any narrative expectation, a conclusion that simply marks the point where the story stops being a story. The cosmos does not end in fire. It does not end in collapse. It does not end in any event at all. It ends, if we can use that word, in the loss of the very ability of the cosmos to host events. The disturbing part is what that emptiness is doing to the very idea of meaning, traced to its final consequence. Because meaning as we usually understand it depends on contrast. It depends on this distinguished from that, on something distinguished from nothing, on now distinguished from then, on here distinguished from there. In a cosmos that has lost its contrasts, the conditions for meaning have not just been removed from any observer. They have been removed from the structure of reality itself. There is no longer a distinction available out of which meaning could be made, even in principle, even by hypothetical minds. This is the deepest implication of the long fade. It is not that the universe forgets us, individually. It is that the universe eventually arrives at a state in which there is nothing left to remember or forget anything at all, because the conditions for memory and forgetting have themselves been dissolved. Memory requires structure. Forgetting requires loss. Both require contrast. The final cosmos lacks the contrasts in which either could occur. And yet, even with this final implication clearly seen, you find yourself returning, again, to the present. Not because the present is exempt, it is not, but because the present is where the entire awareness of all of this is occurring. Every contemplation of the long fade is happening inside a moment that has not yet faded. Every honest acceptance of cosmic indifference is happening inside a brief local arrangement that, for now, allows acceptance to occur. The awareness of the long story is itself a part of the short, bright phase of that story. There is no triumph in this, no vindication. The presence of minds that can recognize the long fading does not delay the fading. The capacity to describe the silence does not fill it. The ability to map the cosmic web does not preserve it. The cosmos continues regardless. But the minds are here now, briefly, inside the only phase in which their existence is possible. And that fact, while it does not change the cosmic trajectory, does describe something true about this particular moment in cosmic time. The moment is not chosen. The moment is not arranged. The moment is not addressed. The moment simply happens to be one in which awareness exists. And inside that moment, the cosmos can be looked at, named, mapped, and slowly understood, even in the parts of itself that point toward awareness's own end. There is a kind of stark dignity in this position, not a heroic dignity, not a victorious dignity, a quiet, almost reluctant dignity that consists simply of looking honestly at a picture that does not flatter the looker and continuing to look. You begin to suspect that this is the final unsettling gift of the cosmos. Not a gift in any warm sense. The cosmos does not give, but a kind of structural offering. The universe is large enough and old enough and complex enough to have produced, briefly, beings capable of perceiving its long trajectory. And those beings, having perceived it, do not have the option of unperceiving it. The picture, once seen clearly, becomes part of the way they exist. Every starlit night carries it. Every cold wind through an open window carries it. Every quiet hour of contemplation carries it. The cosmos has, in effect, handed each such mind a piece of unflinching knowledge that the mind cannot return. And in that knowledge, the future stretches out as it really is, not as a hopeful continuation, not as a promised arc, as an immense, slow, patient unwinding, in which what is currently bright will dim, what is currently connected will separate, what is currently visible will recede, and what is currently aware will eventually no longer be aware of anything. The future is not a place you will eventually arrive in. It is a direction the cosmos is going in, and the part of that direction available to you is the small stretch of it that overlaps with your brief existence. You feel somewhere beneath all of this the particular weight of being one of the brief overlapping beings. Not the only one, not the first, not the last, but one of them. One of the temporary alignments of matter and pattern through which the cosmos has, for a little while, made itself partially visible to itself. That visibility is not durable. That alignment is not eternal. But it is, while it lasts, the only place in the universe where the universe is being looked at with anything resembling understanding. There is no comfort in this that the cosmos itself provides, but there is perhaps a strange kind of solidarity available between the minds that share this temporary phase. Not because we matter to the universe, we do not, but because we briefly matter to each other, and that mattering occurs inside the only window where such mattering is possible. Other minds, near and far, distant in time, distant in space, separated by gulfs that no signal will ever cross, have shared and will share fragments of this same awareness. None of us will ever fully meet. None of us will ever fully be heard by the cosmos. But the awareness itself, scattered thinly across whatever portions of cosmic history have hosted minds, forms, for a brief stretch, a kind of dim, distributed companionship. That companionship does not resolve the long fade. It does not promise that the lights will stay on. It does not save anything from the eventual silence. It is, in its own way, also temporary. But while it lasts, while the windows are still lit, while the night skies are still legible, while the cosmic web is still mappable, the small minds inside the bright phase share, by simple coincidence of timing, the same impossible view, the same enormity, the same emptiness, the same long fading, the same brief fragile capacity to look honestly at what is. And this is where the story, as far as we can carry it, has to stop. Not because there is nothing more to say, there is always more. The cosmos will continue to be examined, mapped, modeled, debated and reinterpreted by every future observer who has the time and instruments to do so. New layers will be uncovered, new patterns will be noticed, new questions will be raised, but the basic shape, traced through everything we have already considered, will not change. The vastness will remain vast. The emptiness will remain dominant. The fading will continue. The long evening will keep deepening, regardless of whoever is watching. You stand in the end where you have always stood, on a small world, beneath a small sky that opens onto a much larger sky beyond, inside a brief stretch of time that opens onto much larger stretches behind and ahead, inside a brief moment of awareness that opens onto vastly longer stretches of unawareness on either side. The view from this position is the only view available to you. It is also the only view, ultimately available to any observer inside the cosmos. The disproportion between the small observer and the large observed is not corrected anywhere. It is simply lived inside. And the cosmos, knowing none of this, indifferent to all of this, continues. The galaxies keep drifting. The expansion keeps accelerating. The dark energy keeps doing whatever it does in the depths of the vacuum. The dark matter keeps shaping the gravitational landscape it cannot be seen to shape. The voids keep widening. The remnants keep cooling. The light keeps reddening. The horizons keep closing. None of these processes need your attention to occur. None of them are altered by your attention either. There is, at last, a final stillness that arrives when you accept this fully. Not a stillness of peace, not a stillness of agreement, a stillness of recognition. You are inside a universe whose long story does not turn toward you. You are inside a moment that is brief and bright and temporary, and from which you will be removed, exactly as everything has been and will be removed from the bright phases that briefly host them. You are inside a structure that is, slowly and silently, unmaking itself, and you are made of the same material that is being unmade. The universe is not a home. It is not a nursery. It is not a battleground. It is not a story being told to anyone. It is a vast unfolding of physical law over time scales that defy meaningful comparison, producing along the way brief flickers of structure, brightness, life, and awareness, all of which dissolve back into the larger flow as the conditions that supported them give way. And so the final image of this long contemplation is not a sky. It is not a galaxy. It is not the cosmic web in its full intricate beauty. It is something simpler, a small window, a small lit room, a small mind inside it, looking outward at the dark. The room will eventually go cold. The window will eventually be empty. The dark will continue to extend in every direction, unchanged by the loss. None of this is a punishment. None of this is a victory for anything. It is simply the way the universe is shaped, and the way the mind that briefly perceived it eventually fits back into that shape. You will close the window soon. You will turn away from the sky. You will return to the smaller scales where life is conducted, where small concerns demand small attentions, where small joys and small sorrows fill the immediate hours. The long story will continue without your immediate observation. The dimming will proceed at its own pace, unmeasured by anything but the slow accumulation of its own consequences. You will go about your days as if the cosmos were stable. The cosmos will continue its long instability beneath that illusion. And somewhere, eventually in a future further than any number you have considered, the last small bright thing in the visible universe will fade. There will be no audience. There will be no farewell. There will be no last observer present to mark the moment, because by that point the conditions for observers will have long since dissolved. The fading will simply happen, as everything else has happened, without ceremony, without recognition, without record. And the cosmos, after that, will continue in a state that has no further chapters worth describing. Not because nothing exists. Some thin material will remain. Some low-energy radiation will drift. Some particles, stable across timescales beyond meaning, will float through volumes too vast to call places. But the story, in any sense that included observers, structures, contrasts, or events, will be over. The universe will have entered the phase that the equations have been pointing toward all along. A phase without a reader, a phase without a witness, a phase in which there is nothing to write about and no one to read. You return one more time to the present moment, to the small lit window, to the cold sky outside, to the dim points of light that have not yet faded, to the faint awareness, somewhere in the back of your mind, of the long evening that has begun and will not end within your lifetime. You stand there for as long as you can bear it, and then for a little longer, because once you have seen the picture clearly, leaving it does not unsee it. The picture remains, the cosmos remains, the fade remains, the brief observer remains, for now. There is no closing word that will dissolve any of this. There is no final phrase that will reassemble the long story into a comfortable shape. The cosmos has been described as honestly as can be managed in its vastness, its emptiness, its hidden architectures, its accelerating expansion, its long, slow loss of contrast, and its eventual settling into a state in which the conditions for any story at all have been quietly removed. Each step of this picture is supported by what we currently know. None of it is invention for effect. The discomfort it produces is not the result of dramatic phrasing. It is the natural response of a small mind discovering, in clear terms, the kind of place it is actually inside. And so the documentary closes, not by softening this picture, but by leaving it intact. The night sky above your roof is what it has been described as. The cosmic web stretching beyond your local horizons is what it has been described as. The dark matter, the dark energy, the voids, the horizons, the entropy, the long fade, the eventual silence, the loss of the conditions for memory and meaning, all of these are what they have been described as. The universe has not corrected the description as we proceeded. The universe will not correct it after we finish. The description stands. You will, at some point, go to sleep tonight. The walls around you will continue to exist. The roof above you will continue to hold. The sky above the roof will continue to fade by amounts too small for any single life to register. The galaxies beyond that sky will continue to drift apart at speeds that are slowly placing some of them forever out of reach. The remnants of past stars will continue to cool. The cosmic background will continue to redden. Somewhere in the unimaginable future, the last black hole will quietly evaporate, and no one and nothing will mark the moment. None of this requires your participation. All of it is already underway, and in the brief stretch of time before all of this completes itself, you will live. You will eat, work, speak, love, lose, sleep, wake, and one day stop. The cosmos will continue past your stopping, as it continues past every stopping, with no acknowledgement that any stopping has occurred. The lights you see tonight will outlast you in their own way for a little while, and then they too will give way to the long process. Nothing in the cosmos will ever circle back to note that you were here, or that any of us were here, or that the brief, bright phase ever briefly contained the kind of minds capable of writing or hearing or contemplating any of this. That is the final, unsoftened shape of the picture. The universe is mostly empty. It is becoming emptier. The structures we love are temporary. The awareness that perceives them is temporary. The conditions that allow both will not return once they have passed. There is no audience watching from outside. There is no record being kept beyond the brief reach of our own instruments. There is only the slow, indifferent unfolding of physical law across timescales that dwarf every concern any mind has ever held. And there is, perhaps, only one honest response left, here at the end. Not denial, not despair, not pretended consolation, just a quiet, steady looking, a willingness to keep the window lit for as long as one can, a willingness to notice the stars while they still arrive, a willingness to sit with the cold knowledge of the long fade without turning that knowledge into either celebration or collapse. Just the looking, just the noticing, just the small, fragile, temporary act of being briefly aware inside a cosmos that will not always permit awareness to occur. The lights above are still burning. The cosmic web is still legible. The voids are still bordered by glowing threads. The expansion is still ongoing. The fade is still in its long, patient middle. You are still here for now, with eyes that work, with a mind that can hold this picture, with a brief stretch of time in which to do so. After this, the cosmos will continue to do what it has always done, in the direction it has always been going, regardless of who is watching. The window is still open. The night sky is still above. The dark is still vast, still mostly empty, still slowly widening. And somewhere in that dark, the long evening of the universe is quietly continuing, one slow step at a time, toward an ending that no observer will ever see, in a silence that no voice will ever interrupt, beneath a future sky that eventually no eye will ever lift toward, because there will be no eye left and no sky worth lifting toward, and no one left to notice that there is no longer anyone watching at all.